20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Chapter 16, A Walk Across the Plains. This cell was both the arsenal and the dressing room of the Nautilus. A dozen diving outfits were hanging on the wall, waiting for us. When Ned Land saw them, he showed an obvious distaste at the idea of putting them on. "But Ned," I said, "these forests of Crespo Island are under the water." "Yes, I know," said the harpooner, disappointed at seeing his dreams of fresh meat vanish. "But you, Monsieur Aronnax, are you going to put on that outfit?" "I've got to, Ned." "Do whatever you want, Monsieur," replied the harpooner, shrugging his shoulders. "But as for me, I'll never get into clothes like that unless they force me to." "Nobody's going to force you, Ned," said Captain Nemo. "Is Conseil going to try it?" asked Ned. "I follow Monsieur wherever he goes," answered Conseil. At a call from the captain, 2 men from the crew came over to help us put on these heavy waterproof suits made of seamless rubber and constructed in such a way as to be able to bear up under considerable pressure. It was like strong yet supple armor. The suit consisted of trousers and a jacket. The trousers ended in thick shoes equipped with heavy lead soles. The fabric of the jacket was held firm by copper plates which protected the chest against the water pressure and allowed the lungs to function freely. Its sleeves ended in gloves that were supple enough for the wearer to perform any normal operations with his hands. As one can see, these highly perfected diving costumes were a far cry from the bulky outfits such as the cork breastplates, the special sea clothes, the boxes, etc., which were invented and praised during the 18th century. Captain Nemo, one of his companions, a kind of Hercules who must have had incredible strength, Conseil and I had soon finished putting on our diving suits. We were completely outfitted except for our metal helmets, but before putting these on, I asked Captain Nemo's permission to examine one of the guns we were going to use. A member of the Nautilus's crew handed me a rather ordinary-looking rifle with a steel butt which was hollow inside and fairly large. This was the reservoir containing the compressed air, which a trigger-operated valve released into the chamber. A magazine hollowed out in the side walls of the butt contained some 20 electric bullets which were automatically placed in the chamber by means of a spring. As soon as one shot had been fired, a second was ready to go off. "Captain Nemo," I said, "this weapon seems both perfect and easy to operate. I ask only to try it out, but how are we going to get out onto the ocean floor?" "Right now, the Nautilus is sitting on the bottom at a depth of 30 feet, and we have only to be on our way." "But how are we going to get out?" "You'll see." Captain Nemo put on his spherical helmet. Conseil and I did the same, not without first hearing the Canadian sarcastically wish us good hunting. The top part of our jackets ended in a threaded copper collar onto which the metal helmet could be screwed. 3 holes covered by thick glass permitted us to see in any direction, merely by turning our heads inside the helmet. As soon as we were completely dressed, the devices were placed on our backs and they began to work at once, and as for me, I found breathing very easy. Then, with the lamp at my belt and the gun in my hand, I was ready to leave. But I felt imprisoned in those heavy clothes and nailed to the deck by my lead soles. I was unable to take a single step. But they had foreseen this difficulty, and I felt myself being helped into a little compartment adjoining the dressing room. My companions were also helped along and entered right behind me. I heard a watertight door close behind us, and we were enveloped in total darkness. After several minutes, a loud whistling noise reached my ears. I could feel something cold rising from my feet to my chest. Evidently, someone inside the submarine had opened a spigot, allowing the outside water to flood the room we were in. It was soon filled, and a second door in the hull of the Nautilus opened. A dim light entered. A moment later, we were walking on the ocean floor. And now, how can I describe my impressions of this walk beneath the surface of the ocean? Words are powerless to recount such marvels. When the painter's brush cannot even reproduce the effects produced by water, how can the pen hope to succeed? Captain Nemo walked out in front, and his companion followed several paces behind us. Conseil and I stayed near one another, as if it might have been possible to talk through the metal around our heads. I no longer felt the weight of my clothing, shoes, and air tank, nor of the thick helmet inside which my head bobbled around like an almond inside its shell. All these objects, once in the water, lost a part of their weight, equal to the amount of water displaced, and I found I was profiting greatly by the law Archimedes discovered. I was no longer an inert mass, but had a relatively great freedom of movement. I was astounded to see how much light reached the ocean floor 30 feet below the surface. The sun's rays easily penetrated this liquid mass, and they made it seem transparent. I could see objects clearly at a distance of 100 yards. Beyond that, the ocean depths were tinted with delicate shades of ultramarine, which turned to a purer blue as the distance got greater, and then disappeared in the midst of a vague shadowiness. Indeed, this water surrounding me was no more than another kind of air, denser than the atmosphere, but almost as transparent. Above me, I could see the calm surface of the sea. We walked over fine-grained sand without the ripples one finds on beaches where the tide has left its mark. This dazzling carpet acted as a reflector, sending back the sun's rays with surprising intensity. As a result, there was an immense reverberation of light which penetrated each liquid molecule. Will the reader believe me if I state that at this depth of 30 feet I could see as well as if I were in broad daylight? For a quarter of an hour I walked over this blazing sand strewn with an almost imperceptible dust from shells. The hull of the Nautilus, looking like a long reef, disappeared little by little, but its searchlight, once night came over the ocean floor, would facilitate our return by throwing out its strong, clear beams. This phenomenon is difficult to understand for someone who has only seen a searchlight's clearly outlined whitish rays on land. There, the dust saturating the air gives them the appearance of a luminous mist, but on water, as well as underwater, their electric gleam is transmitted with incomparable purity. But we kept on walking, and the vast sandy plain seemed unending. With my hand I parted liquid curtains, which closed in again behind me, and the trace of my footsteps was quickly erased by the pressure of the water. Soon some objects looming up in the distance became visible. I recognized a magnificent foreground of rocks covered with splendid specimens of zoophytes, and I was mainly struck with a very special effect produced by the medium we were in. It was then 10 in the morning. The sun's rays struck the surface at a rather oblique angle, and refracted by this contact, as if passing through a prism, they tinted the edges of flowers, rocks, plants, shells, and corals with the 7 colors of the solar spectrum. It was a marvelous feast for the eyes. Colors crisscrossed one another in a veritable kaleidoscope of red, green, yellow, orange, violet, indigo, and blue. The entire palette of an enthusiastic colorist. How I would have liked to describe to Conseil the impression this made on me, and compete with him in uttering phrases of wonder. How I would have enjoyed, like Captain Nemo and his companion, being able to exchange thoughts by means of previously arranged signals. So for lack of anything better, I talked to myself, shouting inside my copper helmet, and perhaps wasting more air than I should have with these vain words. Conseil and I both stopped to admire this marvelous spectacle, confronted by so many specimens of zoophytes and mollusks. He was obviously classifying. The ground was covered with polyps and echinoderms, different kinds of Isidiae, Cornularia, which live in isolation, tufts of virgin Oculineae, formerly called white coral, bristling fungi shaped like mushrooms, and sea anemones holding on to rocks with their muscular discs all formed a flower bed dotted with Porpitiae dressed in their collars of azure tentacles, starfish studding the sand, varicose asterophytons, which look like delicate lace embroidered by the hands of water nymphs, and whose borders moved gently in the eddies produced by our walking. I hated the thought of squashing beneath my feet the brilliant specimens of mollusks, which were strewn over the ground by the thousands, concentric comb shells, hammer shells, wedge shells, which can actually jump, top shells, red helmet shells, winged shells, and so many other products of the inexhaustible ocean. But we had to keep going, and as we walked we could see swimming overhead schools of Portuguese men of war, with their ultramarine blue tentacles trailing along behind them, jellyfish with their milky white or delicate pink bodies edged around with blue, all shading us from the sun's rays, and Panoperae, Pelagiae, which in the darkness would have strewn our path with their phosphorescence. For a quarter of a mile these wonders continued. Whenever I stopped to admire them, Captain Nemo would motion for me to keep moving, and I would have to set out again. But soon the ground changed. The plain of sand was followed by an area of slimy mud, which in America is called ooze, entirely composed of siliceous and calcareous shells. We then crossed a prairie of seaweed, oceanic plants which had not yet been uprooted by the force of the water and which were growing in wild profusion, this thick, soft lawn would have rivaled the most velvety carpet woven by the hand of man. However, there were plants not only underfoot but also overhead. A light arbor of marine plants, classified in the luxuriant family of the algae, in which there are more than 2,000 species, crisscrossed the surface. I could make out long ribbons of sea wrack, some globular and others tubular, Laurentiae, Cladostidae with their slender foliage, and some dulse, which looked like cactus fans. I noticed that the green plants remained nearer the surface, while those colored red occupied a medium depth, leaving the black or brown hydrophytes to form the gardens and flower beds on the deeper parts of the ocean floor. These algae are a real prodigy of creation, one of the marvels of universal plant life. This family produces both the smallest and the largest plants on the earth. Of the smallest kinds, as many as 40,000 have been counted within the space of 1/125th square inch, whereas sea wrack has been found measuring almost a third of a mile in length. It was about an hour and a half since we had left the Nautilus. It was now almost noon. I could see this by the right angle at which the sun's rays entered the water and by the fact that they were no longer refracted. The magical colors had disappeared little by little, and the emerald and sapphire-like nuances had vanished from our world. We walked with a steady step, which resounded on the ocean floor with surprising intensity. The slightest noises were transmitted with a speed to which our land-trained ears were unaccustomed. Water, in fact, is a better conductor of sound than air and carries it 4 times as fast. Just then the ground began to slope sharply downward. The light became uniformly shaded. We reached a depth of 300 feet and a pressure of 10 atmospheres, but my diving suit was so constructed that this pressure caused me no discomfort. The only unpleasant sensation I experienced was in trying to bend my fingers, but even this soon disappeared. As for the fatigue I should have felt after walking 2 hours in such an unaccustomed costume, I felt nothing. The water helped me to move with surprising ease. At this depth I could still make out the sun's rays, but only feebly. Their brilliant intensity had given way to a kind of reddish dusk, halfway between day and night. Nevertheless, we could still see our way clearly, and it was not yet necessary to start using our lamps. Just then, Captain Nemo stopped. After waiting for me to catch up to him, he pointed to several dark masses outlined in the shadows a short way off. That must be the forest of Crespo Island, I thought, and I was right.